As Prince of Wales, England's future King George IV surrendered himself to a life of pleasure. So when he tried to dissolve his marriage to Queen Caroline and strip her of her royal title, many Britons felt a glaring double standard was at work. Caroline Amelia Elizabeth was accused of conducting herself toward one Bartolommeo Pergami with indecent and offensive familiarity and freedom, and of carrying on a licentious, disgraceful, and adulterous relationship with him. On that basis, she was to be deprived of the title, prerogatives, rights, privileges, and pretensions of the Queen Consort of the realm, and her marriage to George IV, King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, was to be dissolved. Such was the charge contained in a Bill of Pains and Penalties introduced in the House of Lords on July 5, 1820. Since Pergami was a foreigner not subject to British law, and since the alleged offences had not taken place in Britain, a trial for treason was not possible. The bill, a private measure introduced on behalf of an unnamed party everyone understood to be the king, was widely seen as a way to punish Queen Caroline without a conventional trial. To Caroline, it was an opportunistic strategy by her dissolute husband to deprive her of her rightful place beside him on the throne. To George IV, it was a convenient way to end the marital warfare that had plagued his private life for a quarter century. A wayward prince. That George should be the accuser in a case of improper behavior was deeply ironic. Born on August 12, 1762, the eldest son of King George III was, in youth, handsome, intelligent, and discerning in his taste for art. But all too soon the Prince of Wales turned into a corpulent rake. His numerous love affairs and profligate spending dismayed his father's subjects, who began calling him the dissolute prince. In 1784, at the age of 22, the heir apparent fell in love virtually at first sight with Maria Fitzherbert, a twice-widowed woman 6 years his senior. The obstacles to their marriage were formidable. As a commoner, Mrs. Fitzherbert was considered beneath the prince's station. As a Catholic, she was barred from marriage to an heir to the throne. And because George was under 25, he could not marry without his father's consent the king would not grant. When Mrs. Fitzherbert declined to become the prince's mistress, George feigned a suicide attempt to lure her to his London townhouse and extract a promise of marriage. Discovering the deceit, she fled to the continent. George asked to live abroad ostensibly for economy, but in truth to be near her, only to be refused by the king, who had been kept fully informed of the affair. After a year, George succeeded in enticing Mrs. Fitzherbert back to England, and on December 15, 1785, they were married in the drawing room of her London home. The Church of England cleric who performed the illegal ceremony was reportedly given money to pay off his debts and promised a bishopric when George became king. Though the prince was thereafter constantly seen in Mrs. Fitzherbert's presence, and their marriage became an open secret, the couple continued to live separately for propriety's sake. An unloved bride. The clandestine marriage did not end George's pursuit of other women or his spendthrift ways. As quarrels with Mrs. Fitzherbert grew more frequent and his debts mounted, the prince concluded that only an officially recognized union with a Protestant princess could save him from financial ruin. His younger brother, the Duke of York, had been rewarded for a proper marriage with an increased allowance from the king. In August 1794, George told his father he had broken off with Mrs. Fitzherbert and was prepared to enter a more creditable line of life. He was, he insisted, ready for a royal marriage. The bride he chose was Caroline of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, his first cousin and daughter of the Duke of Brunswick. His mother, Queen Charlotte, was appalled, writing to her brother that Caroline is a woman I do not recommend at all. The princess was said to be so passionate that her father would not let her go from one room to another without a chaperone. A governess was instructed to shadow her at court dances lest she make an exhibition of herself by indecent conversations with men. Lord Malmesbury, sent to negotiate the match, described Caroline as short and plump, with a head rather too big for her body yet cheerful and always laughing. Her father insisted she was not stupid, merely lacking in judgment and prone to tactless remarks and harsh criticism of others. When Caroline arrived in England, she was officially greeted by the Countess of Jersey, rumored to have replaced Mrs. Fitzherbert in the prince's affections. Lady Jersey promptly told Caroline to change her dress and apply rouge for her first meeting with her future husband. George dutifully embraced her, then turned abruptly away and called to Lord Malmesbury, "Harris, I am not well. Pray get me a glass of brandy." As soon as he left the room, Caroline, who had only just begun to learn English, asked plaintively in French, "Mon Dieu, "Does the prince always act like this? No more taken by him than he was by her," she added. "I think he's very fat, and he's nothing like as handsome as his portrait." Their wedding took place 3 days later, on April 8, 1795. The prince appeared to be quite drunk. A shilling for the princess. In January 1796, Caroline gave birth to a daughter. 3 days later, George, despondent, ill, and convinced he was about to die, wrote a new will. In it, he left all his money and property to his beloved and adored Maria Fitzherbert, calling her the wife of my heart and soul. To his infant daughter he bequeathed the jewels previously bestowed on Caroline. To his lawful wife, her who is called the Princess of Wales, he left exactly 1 shilling. In a lengthy exchange of correspondence, Caroline demanded that she and George henceforth be man and wife in name only. He must never attempt to produce another heir, even in the event of their daughter's death. "Nature has not made us suitable to each other," the prince replied. Having reached an agreement to live separately, he added maliciously, "The rest of our lives will be passed in uninterrupted tranquility." All efforts by the king to save his son's marriage failed, yet he refused to grant the couple a formal separation. By the summer of 1797, Caroline was settled in a country house several hours from London. Deserted by the few friends she had made in aristocratic circles, she surrounded herself with young naval officers, politicians, and writers. Informers told George that his spurned wife was leading a scandalous life. Rumors even claimed she had given birth to an illegitimate child by one of her many lovers. In December 1805, a committee of the King's Council acquitted her of that charge. Caroline blithely remarked that the only mistake she had ever made was going to bed with Mrs. Fitzherbert's husband. Free at last, the mental illness from which George III had long suffered grew so severe that the king was declared incompetent in 1811, and his son became regent. The prince used his new authority to ban Caroline from court activities and exclude her from the festivities held in London in the summer of 1814 to honor the sovereigns who had united to defeat Napoleon. In August, traveling as the Countess of Wolfe and Tell, Caroline boarded a frigate bound for France. Witnesses recalled tears in her eyes as she left England. George had hoped she would live quietly in retirement somewhere in Europe, but Caroline was determined to see the world, to enjoy life to the fullest, and to do exactly as she pleased. Back in Brunswick, she exhausted her hosts with suppers, dances, and glittering parties that lasted until dawn. In Geneva, the 46-year-old princess shocked guests at a masked ball by appearing dressed, or rather, undressed from the waist up, as Venus. In Milan, she added to her entourage a swarthy, robust former soldier named Bartolommeo Pergami, 14 years her junior, as a kind of valet. Before long, Pergami was promoted to chamberlain and granted the title Baron della Francina. He organized Caroline's pilgrimage to the Holy Land and extended tour via Sicily, Algiers, Greece, and Turkey, reaching a theatrical climax when she rode into Jerusalem on an ass. Back in Europe, Caroline rented a villa in Italy and installed Pergami's family there, excluding only his estranged wife. His young daughter, Victorine, slept in Caroline's bedroom and called her Mama. Toward the end of 1817, Caroline learned that her 21-year-old daughter had died in childbirth. She sadly realized that the last impediment to a divorce from George had been removed. With their child dead, she wrote her lawyer, Henry Brougham, that George would now have no hesitation in making false and foul accusations against my character. The next summer, George dispatched a 3-man commission to Milan to investigate the princess's bizarre behavior in Italy and gather evidence of her infidelity, claiming a crown. When George III died on January 29, 1820, the 57-year-old regent ascended the throne as King George IV. He offered Caroline a generous financial settlement if she would renounce her title and remain abroad. She refused. On June 5, Caroline returned to England to claim her crown as queen consort. In defiance of the unpopular monarch, crowds greeted her rapturously in London. "Long live the Queen! No Queen, no King!" supporters shouted as they surged around her residence. Alarmed by the mobs outside his windows calling him Nero, the king withdrew from London to Windsor Castle. Before leaving, he sent messages to both houses of Parliament urging immediate and serious attention to the contents of a certain green bag. It contained the Milan Commission's report and provided the basis for the Bill of Pains and Penalties introduced in the House of Lords early the next month. Non mi ricordo. The Queen appeared in person at the House of Lords for the opening of the public inquiry. Everybody called it a trial on August 17th. A loyal newspaper said she looked extremely well, but less charitable observers noted how much weight she had gained and how heavily she had applied makeup to support the bill depriving Caroline of her title and dissolving her marriage. The government summoned numerous witnesses from Italy, servants and workmen from her villa, sailors from the ship that carried her to the Holy Land who could bolster the charge of adultery with Pergami. The first witness, Teodoro Majocchi, testified that he had twice seen the Queen in Pergami's bedroom. Henry Brougham, acting as her chief counsel, destroyed Majocchi's testimony in cross-examination, confusing the unfortunate witness so thoroughly that he could answer almost every question only with, "Non mi ricordo, I don't remember." Overnight, the phrase became a national refrain. Other witnesses offered evidence of indiscretion, but none could substantiate the charge of adultery. On November 10th, the Lords voted on the bill. 108 supported it, 99 opposed it. With such a narrow margin, the government concluded it would be unlikely to pass the House of Commons, where Caroline was believed to have stronger support. Reluctantly, ministers informed the king that the charges would have to be withdrawn. London and other cities celebrated Caroline's victory with 3 days of fireworks, bonfires, dances, and parades. George IV, however, had the last word. When Caroline appeared at Westminster Abbey on July 19, 1821, for the king's coronation, she was stopped at the door and denied admission because she did not have a proper ticket. Almost immediately, the rejected queen took to her bed with an acute intestinal disorder. Her doctors prescribed bleeding, opium, and castor oil enough, Henry Brougham said, to have turned the stomach of a horse. On August 7th, she died, murmuring in French, "I die without sorrow. I die without regret." When royalty marries for love. For Europe's royalty, marriage has long been a matter of duty and seldom of love. Partners, especially for heirs to a throne, were chosen from among those of equal rank to forge the strongest political, military, or financial alliances. Marriage to a mere noble was frowned upon. Marriage to a commoner was scorned. Nonetheless, a prince could fall in love with a woman deemed ineligible to be a royal spouse. To accommodate such unions, the morganatic marriage was created. The term derives from a Latin phrase meaning marriage on the morning gift. The bride is entitled to no more than the dowry she receives the morning after her wedding. She gains no right to her husband's title, coat of arms, or fortune, and their children cannot inherit these. Such unions were also called marriage on the left hand, because the bride stood to the left of the groom rather than to the right, as was customary. Upon the death of Queen Marie Therese, Louis XVI of France reportedly contracted a morganatic marriage with his mistress, Madame de Maintenon. Frederick William III of Prussia entered a second marriage on the left hand with the Countess of Herrick. Perhaps the most famous morganatic marriage of modern times was that of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, to Countess Sophie Chodek in 1900. Sophie was constantly reminded of her lower rank, kept from entering rooms at her husband's side or sitting next to him in royal processions. But on one fateful occasion, they were together, riding in a motorcade through Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. The assassin's bullets that killed them that day became, in effect, the first shots of World War I.